This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. Today we have probably the most famous Harvard professor in the world right now, Professor Avi Loeb, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been on Fox News. He's been everywhere talking about Three Eye Atlas. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing great, thank you. I actually had two essays posted today on medium.com. If anyone wants to check the latest updates, it's over there.
Yes, and I was actually just noticing that as I was waiting for you to come on, and I see that there's a new picture on one of your essays. Maybe you could explain to us your latest essay.
Yeah, so there were several developments over the past few days. 3I Atlas, the interstellar object, passed perihelion, closest approach to the sun, on October 29th. And around the same time, there were a number of new results that came out of observatories. The image you were showing was just obtained a couple of days later, so that these are the latest images we have after perihelion. But just before perihelion, there were several interesting results. We couldn't observe it from Earth because it's on the opposite side of the sun relative to Earth, and it's difficult to look in the direction of the sun and watch objects that are just close to it within a few degrees. However, we have observatories or cameras that are moving around the sun, watching the sun, and those were able to observe it. One of them is called Stereo, another one is called Soho, and the third one is called the GOES 19. And when they observed it approaching perihelion, it appeared to be brightening very quickly, inversely with separation from the sun to the power of 7.5. So very rapid brightening, inversely proportional to the separation. So as it got closer, it got extremely bright. And also, the color of the object was bluer than the sun. And that is surprising because usually comets shed the dust that makes them red. And also, they have a surface that is much cooler than the sun's surface. We expect for 3I Atlas a surface temperature of about a few hundred degrees above absolute zero, similar, somewhat below the surface temperature of the Earth. But the sun is obviously much hotter, 5,800, and therefore the sun should be bluer than 3I Atlas. Nevertheless, we see 3I Atlas being bluer than the sun. And of course, there are two possibilities. One is that it's some natural process. For example, carbon monoxide, when it loses an electron, this is a molecule that has transitions in the blue. Maybe that's what triggers the blue color. Or if it's technological, then you could have some hot engine attached to it that appears to be emitting in the blue when it's powering this device. Very far away, it looked red. Now it appears to be blue, close to the sun. The other thing that was discovered, which is very significant, is that we noticed non-gravitational acceleration. And in fact, this was reported by the Jet Propulsion Lab, a NASA branch in Pasadena, on their official website. And I learned that the data came from a millimeter wavelength observatory called ALMA in Chile. And that data indicated that the object is 4 arc seconds away in right ascension from where it was supposed to be if it didn't deviate from a path that is sculpted by gravity alone. And so that's very significant. And I did a calculation immediately after I learned about it that indicated that the object had to lose about 1/6 of its mass or more, somewhere between close to 20% of its mass. If it's a natural comet, that's how much mass it had to lose in order to get a boost with the non-gravitational acceleration of the magnitude that was observed. So that's very significant. It means that if in that case, there should be a plume of gas that carries more than 5 billion tons. in mass. And therefore, in principle, it could explain also the brightening of the object. But what it means is that as we get to observe it, once it goes away from the sun, so we can see it from Earth, and also there is a spacecraft called the JUICE that was launched by the European Space Agency that could see it in the coming week. As soon as we get data on it, we should see that it's surrounded by a very bright and massive cloud of gas. That's in case it's a natural comet. If we don't see a massive cloud of gas, much more massive than it was when the object was far away from the sun, then something else must have been propelling it, and that would obviously be very exciting to discuss. But there is a very clear test right now. In the coming weeks, we should see a very massive and bright glow around the object, much more than we saw before, if it's a natural comet. And it will continue to evaporate as it moves along, and there should be additional non-gravitational acceleration. However, if we don't see the plume of gas that must be the case if it's a natural comet, then something else was propelling it. And we would, in that case, we would have some sensation of deja vu, because that was the case of Oumuamua, the first interstellar object. There wasn't actually any gas or dust observed around it, and nevertheless, it exhibited non-gravitational acceleration. In the case of 3 Atlas, we know that it had some gas around it because it was detected by the Webb telescope, mostly CO2, 87%, and then carbon monoxide, CO, about 9% by mass, and then 4% water. So that was the result that the Webb telescope obtained back on the 6th of August this year, 2025. However, we should see if that amount of gas is increased dramatically as a result of the passage of the object near the sun, in which case, it would be a very massive cloud, much brighter than it was farther away.
Someone on here is asking, is it still 4 out of 10 on the Loeb scale?
That's an excellent question, and I'm waiting to see the additional data in the coming weeks. If we see that it lost indeed around 10 to 20% or more of its mass to a cloud of gas, we will be able to infer what it's made of, and that would be the appearance of a natural object. So I would reduce my rank on the Loeb scale, because at that point, if it lost, let's say, a fifth of its mass, we pretty much obliterated, removed a significant fraction of the object into a gas phase, and we can tell that what it's made of. It's not the skin of the object, the way that the very low level of ablation expressed itself in previous months. Now it should have been a major catastrophic disruption of the object. So that would allow us not only to tell that indeed it's being propelled by the rocket effect from cometary evaporation, but also we can examine this debris around it to figure out what it's made of, in which case it will confirm that it's a natural comet. However, if we don't see that, the question is, what provided it with this non-gravitational acceleration? And as I said, that was the case in Oumuamua. So let's just wait and see. And I'm just waiting in the coming weeks, and especially on the 19th of December, that's when the object would be closest to Earth. That's 6 days before Christmas. And of course, if it's a natural object, we'll have a lot of data on it from the hundreds of observatories on Earth at that time, also from the Webb telescope, the Hubble telescope. And my hope is that it will not turn out to be a technological object that will send us some gifts for the holidays that we don't want.
Some people are saying, why would we assume that it would be more likely negative than positive if it is a technological object? Do you think it's half and half? We just have to be prepared for whatever it is if it is technological, or is there something, a particular reason why you think it could be a bad thing?
No, I think it's like going on a blind date. And my recommendation when you go on a blind date, especially of interstellar proportion, like this one, we should observe the other side before having an opinion. Because when you have a visitor to your backyard, an intelligent visitor, then you really need to assess the level of risk, whether it's a bad thing, a good thing. It could be an opportunity for us to grow as a technological civilization. We will learn some new technologies. We will be inspired to explore space. If we have neighbors that visit us, we might want to visit them. So that could be very uplifting. It will inspire humanity to stop engaging in conflicts on all kinds of issues that are associated with this rock that we are born on, the Earth, and instead look up and imagine all the real estate that is out there, and imagine that we have neighbors, and that I think will have a very positive effect. We very much need this wake-up call that will change our priorities. What do we put the money into, the resources, the effort? As of now, we put $2.4 trillion into military budgets worldwide. Maybe we should dedicate a fraction of that, maybe $1 trillion a year, to space exploration. And of course, a visit of another technological civilization might trigger us to do that. So that could be very positive. But of course, when you go on a blind date, you also have to verify that whoever is on the other side is not a serial killer. That's a possibility. And the only way to find out the intent of the visitor and the level of threat that the visitor poses is to get data. You can't just think about it and decide ahead of time, because it really, our imagination is limited to the experience we had here on Earth. My guess is that if we have a visit, it's not about us. We tend to think that everything centers on us. We thought that we are the center of the universe, and we think that if we have a visitor, it's all about us. But the situation might be very similar to us being like ants in the crack of a pavement, watching a biker passes through, and the biker doesn't really care about the ants in the pavement.
How would you imagine if it was technological and they wanted to contact us in a good way? How would they do that without risking coming closer to us and us shooting something at it?
Well, very simply because they probably have technologies far better than we have. So, they shouldn't really feel that they're threatened by anything we do, because if they manage to arrive to our backyard, and the journey takes millions to billions of years, then and especially in this case when the object is more than 5 kilometers in diameter, that the biggest rocket that we ever built is Starship, and that's less than 100 meters. So just compare the size of a football field to the size of New York City. It's really very different, and it's difficult for me to imagine how you launch such a big technological object, given what we know about technology. And also, how do you power it? And you need a lot of nuclear reactors based on what we possess. So if something like that happens to be technological, it goes way beyond the imagination of Hollywood scripts. And I think we should just be curious and figure out what it entails without assuming that we know the answer in advance or imagining the answer, because nature could be far more imaginative than we are.
One thing that you reported on the other day was apparently Anna Paulina Luna sent a letter to NASA requesting the pictures that they took on October 2nd or 3rd of the Three Eye Atlas when it was near Mars. Do you have any updates on that?
Yeah, so this is really surprising that the best resolution image that we have is hidden behind the veil of the government shutdown, and because it was taken just a day or two after the government shutdown was initiated. Now, I should say that the principal investigator of the high-res camera on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is not a NASA employee. He is a professor at the University of Arizona, and in principle, the team could have shared the data with other scientists. There is no reason to keep it secret. By law, under normal circumstances, NASA should have released the data within a couple of days after it was taken, because it was funded. The data collection was funded by taxpayers' money. However, someone up there at NASA is using the shutdown as a reason to keep it under wraps, and I think it's very inappropriate to use the politics of the day in sabotaging scientific progress, because it's a time-sensitive information. Once we know we can learn from the best image we have what we're looking at, then we can design additional observations in the coming weeks that would shed more light on this object. So there is no reason whatsoever to keep it under wraps, and it doesn't cost much money to share it. I should say that I noticed on social media that Kim Kardashian asked the acting administrator of NASA for a comment about 3i Atlas, and Sean Duffy immediately responded to her in a tweet explaining what 3i Atlas is, saying that it's unrelated to aliens, and asking her to help in public relations with the Artemis program. And it didn't take him much time to respond to that tweet by Kim Kardashian, an influencer, whereas an official letter from the Honorable Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna was not attended to anyway. And I requested it directly from the High-Rise team, any information they have. I didn't get a reply. So I think it's just inappropriate to give a higher priority to influencers or entertainers than to scientists like myself or to Congresswoman Luna. I think, obviously, I'm all for the interim administrator Duffy communicating with Kim Kardashian. That's perfectly fine, but he shouldn't then ignore altogether the request from scientists to get data on 3i Atlas. At the very least, he should respond to both promptly. But we didn't get a response. I didn't get a response for weeks from the team itself. And it looks like there is no response to the letter, the official letter as well. Now, it's possible that they're working on it and they will release it in the coming days. That's definitely my hope. I think NASA is not about public relations. It's not about collaborating with influencers. It's more about producing the best science in the world. And that's the way that the priorities should be set.
Now, I am from Canada, and one of the biggest news sources in Canada, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, put out an article the other day saying factually that it's not an alien spaceship. What do you think about them being so factual about this, as if we know what this is? It's 100% not an alien spacecraft.
Well, one should ask them as well as any other science popularizer who insists that it must be a natural comet, like, for example, Brian Cox, who didn't even write a single scientific paper on this subject. I wrote 11 papers, and so he is very confident. Partly people who are ignorant of the data, of the facts, can be very confident. We know that from many other examples, that as long as you are sufficiently ignorant, you can be confident. Once you know the details, you are not that confident. And the point is that there are 10 anomalies of this object that I listed just this morning on medium.com. Just look for Avi Loeb at medium.com. The second essay down the list, I wrote 2 essays today, but the second one is about the 10 anomalies. And those 10 anomalies include various unlikely properties of 3i Atlas. For example, it's very big. It's 1 million times the mass of the first interstellar object. Why haven't we seen 1 million Oumuamuas before we see the first giant object like that? Why is it lying in the plane of the planets around the sun to within 5 degrees? That's roughly the precision by which the planets themselves lie in that plane within a few degrees. And why is it so fine-tuned also to arrive into the solar system at the right time, so that it's at the right place to come close to Mars, Venus, and Jupiter? Why is it avoiding the Earth, being exactly on the opposite side of the sun when it comes closest to the sun? Is it related to a maneuver? Why does it show an unusual polarization that was never seen before? Why did it have a jet of a glow pointed towards the sun during July and August, when comets have usually a tail that is pointed away from the sun? And that was a very a significant elongated antitail that was 10 times longer than it is wide. Why does it have mostly carbon dioxide with only 4% water by mass? Why does it have nickel with very little iron? I should say that Joe Rogan spoke with Elon Musk on Friday, and they discussed the nickel with little iron. And Elon said, of course, there are many asteroids that have a lot of nickel. And in fact, when they collide with Earth, that's the kind of location that you want to go to get nickel. That's entirely true. But what he's missing is that along with these objects being nickel rich, they're also iron rich. In nature, we find nickel and iron together because they are both produced in the same supernova explosions of stars. And you can't produce nickel without iron or iron without nickel, and they come together. And in fact, in the solar composition, there is more iron than nickel. So you really need to separate the nickel from the iron in order to get it to be in proportions as observed in the plume of gas around the 3A Atlas. And the only other place where we see such an exaggerated proportion of nickel relative to iron is in the industrial production of nickel alloys. And that was the whole point of me mentioning that. It's not the fact that some rocks do not have a lot of nickel. It's the fact that those that have a lot of nickel also have a lot of iron. And the other thing is that this object is not made of nickel. It's not as if it's mostly nickel. It's mostly carbon dioxide on the surface. At least that's what we've seen.
Now, I watched Elon's appearance on Joe Rogan as well, because obviously they brought you up. He did say right away that he thought it was a comet, but he wasn't 100% close-minded on it. He did say it could be alien life. What were your thoughts overall on what he had to say about it? Because I believe they talked for 4 or 5 minutes about 3I Atlas.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right attitude, to be open-minded. It's a sign of humility. We shouldn't assume that we know the answers in advance. And if something looks strange, we should be curious and figure it out based on data. That's all I'm asking. However, there are people who see that as heresy. The fact that, I'm willing to entertain a possibility that they are dismissing up front, even without good data. They don't really explain the anomalies. I want them to explain the anomalies. I wrote 2 papers trying to explain one of the anomalies in recent weeks, the extended glow in front of the object towards the sun. And, we should all assume that there is some reason for these anomalies and try to figure them out. And if, for example, the alignment with the plane of the planets, that is not easy to explain because it's the third object. And, the chance of the third object being in that plane is less than 1%. You can just do the math of the geometry. And why would the third object be in that plane with such a big size? When we haven't seen a lot of small ones, that these are serious issues that they should address. So whenever someone says, I'm confident, it's not a matter of authority. It's not a matter of making a statement. It's a matter of explaining the anomalies. So rather than waste time in making statements and sounding like the adult in the room, these people should actually say what is their response for the anomalies. That's really the question that they should be asked. How do you explain the fact that this massive object, first of all, is so massive relative to the previous one? Second, it comes close to planets, with a very small likelihood. And third, that it comes within the plane of the planets around the sun to within 5 degrees. Why would you have such an alignment? And these are questions that I haven't seen any of these critics or people who decide that that it must be natural. The other thing that they are missing is, in difference from situations in science that very often have no impact on society. In those situations, when you observe, for example, an exploding star billions of light years away, has no impact on our life. If we misinterpret it, nothing bad happens. So scientists better stick to the most likely explanation for those events and completely dismiss any alternatives. That's fine. But when you deal with a situation that has impact on humanity, on society, you can't ignore a small probability event or possibility, because when you multiply a small probability by a huge impact, you get a significant outcome. And so that's well known within the intelligence agencies, within, when they assess risk. For example, many terrorist attacks are assigned a small probability because most of the time they don't happen. But nevertheless, there is a contingency plan, and the security forces have put a lot of attention to the details. When they see anomalies, they immediately check, does it indicate that there is a risk or not? Why do they take it seriously even though it's unlikely? It's because the impact would be huge, and scientists are not used to that. So when they realize the probability is small, they just dismiss it, ridicule it, don't want to discuss it. But when the implications for society are large, you can't do that. And they should be educated about that, because that's the whole point of intelligence agencies or security forces. They have to take into account low probability events just because of the huge impact that they have. And in a situation where we have a visitor to our backyard from another star, we must monitor those anomalies and take it seriously. It makes no sense to ridicule the discussion on events that people say are low probability, because the implications are huge.
And I notice even some people in the UFO community, like Jeremy Corbell, kind of downplay you
Yes.
because they're, I think, jealous that you're getting all this publicity and have been in the news more than them, even though you're kind of bringing light and credibility to their side of the spectrum. So
Yeah, I really don't understand that, because I'm trying to make the best case I can from what sounds to me like common sense, getting more data, paying attention to data. From the start, there were conspiracy theories that said I'm trying to deflect attention from the Epstein files, which was a ridiculous claim, because you can see this object in the sky if you buy a telescope big enough. It's not up to me. This thing is not about me. It's about an object that appears unusual, that has anomalies, and that we should study. That, the focus should be on the object, not on me. And then, it just shows you, it's a prism that shows you the character of the people who are criticizing the discussion, because these people are not really interested in facts. I'm advocating, the only thing I'm doing is trying to advocate, let's get more data, let's figure it out, because it's a serious matter if it turns out to be technological. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's definitely technological. I'm not, and I am actually also leading the Galileo project that just built 3 observatories looking for UAPs. And I asked my research team to check if there's any enhanced activity following the perihelion of 3I Atlas. And the same should be done for Mars, to check if there is anything there. So I'm just saying, let's stick to the facts. And if there are anomalies, let's try and figure them out by getting more facts. And then you see all kinds of characters shouting, no, this is ridiculous, we shouldn't discuss it. And why are they doing that? It just shows you their character, because they are not really interested in facts. They have some narrative that they're promoting.
Lisa wants to know what your thoughts are on the anti-gravitational acceleration.
Right. So I just mentioned that very briefly at the end of my podcast with Joe Rogan. And the idea is that in principle, we are familiar with positive masses. Only positive masses are known to exist. That's why gravity is attractive. However, we are also familiar with the fact that the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. So there seems to be a negative gravity effect pushing the galaxies apart. And so the universe is accelerating its expansion rather than decelerating. And And that shows us that there is some substance which is called the dark energy that behaves like negative mass. It produces anti-gravity that pushes the matter in the universe to expand faster and faster over time. And of course, that's counterintuitive. But so if for example we turn the Earth into a negative mass of the same value, but just negative, so that it produces repulsive gravity. If we were to throw a tennis ball up in the air, it would move faster and faster away from the negative mass Earth until it reaches the speed of light. And that's amazing. Instead of it falling back, it would be driven away. And if it gets far enough, then the acceleration would cease. But if you imagine like an Earth and an anti-Earth, in other words, Earth and with a positive mass and another Earth with a negative mass next to it, the Earth would push the other negative mass, would pull it towards it because it has an attractive gravity. The negative mass Earth would push the Earth away from it. So what you will end up with is the two of them will move together and accelerate over time, because the Earth, the positive mass Earth, will feel a push and will pull together with it the other one. And if we were to live on Earth, we would not feel a huge acceleration. It will be of order 1g if the two objects are close to each other. And that's the acceleration we are used to on the surface of Earth. And by the way, if you accelerate at 1g, within 1 year, you reach close to the speed of light. And then the acceleration will continue, and we will get very, very close to the speed of light, so that in principle, we can traverse the entire universe in only 25 years or so in our rest frame, whereas the rest of the universe, continues to age much more by billions of years, while in our rest frame, simply because we're moving close to the speed of light, time will elapse much more slowly. So this is an amazing thing, that you can propel objects up to the speed of light, just by having the technology of producing a negative mass. And you don't need fuel for that. And the question is, can one construct such an object with a negative mass? I'm currently collaborating with a team of researchers called Applied Physics. We're trying to finish up a paper that discusses perhaps an opportunity to do that. The one concern that I have is, if there is a way of making a negative mass object and we manage to produce it, then there is also a path for creating a time machine, because one can show that, near a positive mass object, if you pass light, for example, then it's being delayed because time is ticking more slowly close to the positive mass. And so it takes more time relative to an observer far away. It takes more time for the light to reach the distant observer than without that positive mass. But now if you put a negative mass, you get, instead of a time delay, you get a time advance. And in principle, you can build a time machine if you bring this negative mass close to the speed of light and have some set of mirrors. One can arrange it to so that a photon, a particle of light, will return to its starting point at a time that was before it was originally sent. And that's worrisome, because if you can make a time machine, it means that you can do something to your grandparents, and how come you were born. Like, it's not obvious that nature allows that. So I'm a little bit concerned that maybe it's not possible to make a negative mass because of that. But I'm looking into it, with what we know about physics, and I think it's a very interesting subject to study.
A lot of people discuss these days that extraterrestrials could actually be time travelers. What do you make of that theory?
Well, we don't have a recipe for making a time machine, and maybe they managed to do that in a way that's similar to what I described. We know that if you have access to negative mass or negative energy densities, you could build a time machine or something that bring you back in time. And and also wormholes and all kinds of other things. But a lot of physicists think that it's not possible because it will create paradoxes in physics. If you were to go back in time, then the problem is not well defined because usually in physics you have some initial conditions that you start from, and then you can evolve the system. But if the system can go back in time before the initial conditions, it will screw up the initial conditions, and then it will not be logically consistent, and that's a serious matter. And as of now, we don't have examples for working time machines, so it's not, it's not an issue. But maybe aliens figured it out. I mean, I have no idea.
You're becoming friends with some people that are pretty high up in the government. Have you had any confidential discussions with any of these representatives where they may have told you some information that you're maybe not allowed to say publicly that you know?
No, I don't know anything beyond the scientific work that I'm doing, which is not tied up with any non-disclosure agreements as of now. So I'm not aware, and that's that's why obviously I would have been happy to help government if there is such information that they want to figure out. But so far, nobody shared with me anything.
Someone is asking, what is the reason for the extreme negative polarization of the Three Eye Atlas?
Yeah, so one possibility is that it's this geometry of a jet-like configuration that I mentioned, where the glow was extended towards the sun rather than the standard cometary tail. And perhaps because of this geometry, the polarization was negative. That would be my conjecture, but I haven't demonstrated that in a published paper.
Very good. There's some other fan questions I wanted to bring up. One said, if this is not an alien, what does this tell us about other solar systems and the formation of planets?
Right. So that's an excellent question, because my point is we can learn, irrespective of whether it's a natural object or technological, we can learn a lot because it comes from another environment. It would take us, millions to billions of years to go there, bring materials back, and instead we have an object that came from those environments to us and spent the amount of time of millions to billions of years to go through the journey. And we cannot ignore that. And I think in the future what we need to do is intercept missions that would potentially land on such an object like 3i Atlas, which is very massive. It's a great gift because it's massive, bright, and also in the plane of the planets. So that's the best you can hope for, because it spends a lot of time in the vicinity of our space assets around other planets, around the Earth. So we have a great opportunity to study it, and I wish we dedicated more effort to placing interceptors. We didn't do that, and I suggested in a published paper that we use Juno, but it turns out that it doesn't have enough fuel. This is the spacecraft around Jupiter. And in fact, Representative Luna also wrote a letter to NASA encouraging them to use Juno. It could have intercepted, if it had all the fuel that it started with, it could have intercepted 3 Atlas, but unfortunately it used most of it. But it will still use its radio antenna to search for any radio signal, and also its imagers. I should say, with respect to radio data, following the fact that I noticed that the WOW signal came from roughly the same direction within 9 degrees in the sky with a probability of 0.6%, as the arrival direction of 3 Atlas. I approached a number of radio observers, and they confirmed last week that they will look at it. So I very much hope to see that, because we don't expect radio emission from a rock. Yeah.
Could you go into more detail on something you've talked about briefly, that while it was behind the sun, that it could have been dropping probes? What would these probes look like if they were dropping them? And when would we be able to see them? Only when they're coming close enough that it's too late, or what would be the deal?
Yeah, so that really depends on the size of any such probes. And if they are bigger than 100 meters, the size of a football field, then we should be able to see them from the reflection of sunlight. That is the sensitivity of the Rubin Observatory, for example. And on the other hand, we've never launched anything as big as hundreds of meters. The Starship rocket is less than 100 meters in size. So for us, it would be, if we were to deploy probes, they would have dimensions of less than 10 meters or so. And in that case, it's very difficult to detect the reflected sunlight from such small objects, less than 10 meters in size, until they get close to Earth. And so eventually, once they reach the vicinity of Earth, enter the Earth's atmosphere, we should be able to see them easily. So that's with respect to Earth, but I'm also encouraging NASA, and Representative Luna also included that in her letter, to monitor any such objects around Mars with the rovers that NASA has on Mars, and as well as the orbiters they have there, and they should just monitor for any unusual activity. And if there is any object showing up that was not there before, we should know about it.
Does 3I Atlas have chemical composition that could harm our sun's atmosphere, to your knowledge?
Well, of course. I mean, it sheds cyanide, for example, or CO, and these are harmful gases. But currently, it's at very large distance from Earth, so that wouldn't really affect us at all. Only if it came close to us. And for example, if there was an approach into the Earth's atmosphere, we should obviously be very worried. If it comes close to us at any point, we should be very worried. It's a big object, and the last time that such a big object approached us was the Chicxulub impactor that killed the non-avian dinosaurs 66 million years ago. So we usually assume that impactor came from an asteroid in the solar system, but a situation where an interstellar object of a similar size would collide with Earth would lead to the same consequences. It could be devastating. And maybe there is someone out there that wants to reset life on Earth every now and then. It would be bad luck for us if that happens. Let's hope that 3I Atlas just continues close to its original course.
Another fan question here. Any new measurements of the polarization of the object? It had an extreme negative polarization earlier.
Right. None that I'm aware of. And my guess is that it should change because the geometry of the glow around the object changed. In September and October, there was both an antitail and a tail. Whereas in July and August, there was only an antitail in the sunward direction. So something changed, and that should have changed the polarization. That would be my guess.
Do you think the timing of Trump wanting us to use nuclear objects again has to do with the 3I Atlas as a visitor to maybe protect us?
Unlikely. I think it's more to do with geopolitics on Earth, because I haven't seen convincing evidence that shows beyond any doubt that 3I Atlas is technological. So I don't think the government knows, and therefore I don't think they would test nuclear weapons just for that purpose. I think it's more to do with, China or Russia or other threats that might be like, these are weapons that were developed a long time ago, and it's about time to test them. I think just to make sure that they are still operational. That would be my guess.
Are you surprised that China hasn't released any pictures of the 3I Atlas?
No, I'm not surprised, because probably their cameras are not as good as HiRISE. And so maybe the data is of poor quality, or they don't even see the object. If you don't have a big enough aperture, you can't really tell that it's out there.
Other fan question here. You're probably more familiar with them than me. L. Ron Hubbard and Aleister Crowley. Do you know who they are? And do you think it's a coincidence that the first Atlas paper was co-authored by them? What are the odds? Oh, and you already answered that it's still a 4 on the Loeb scale.
Yeah. No, I don't know these other people. My co-authors on one of the papers that was published in a peer-reviewed journal recently. Yeah, I mean, there is similarity in the last names, but they are not the same people as far as I know.
Have you received any data or input of the 3i Atlas from other space agencies? We already just brought up China, but what about India?
No, I haven't received. And it's perhaps for the same reason that the data is of poor quality. But the one thing we definitely know is the high-res camera has high quality, and we just want to be able to learn from it. And yeah, it's really surprising that someone is playing games with that data.
Someone's bringing up the probes. Do you think that some of these drones that seem to be appearing again could possibly be probes from the 3i Atlas or have any relation to them?
Well, one has to conclude that the flight characteristics of these drones do not match those of human-made drones. In that case, of course, that would be suspicious. And that's what we are doing in the Galileo project. We use machine learning to study the distances, velocities, accelerations of objects in the sky and decide whether they fall into the performance envelope of human-made technologies. And so far, we haven't seen anything crazy, but we're just starting right now, and we'll have a few million objects in the coming year that we are monitoring.
Are you surprised at, I guess, the lack of media coverage of this overall? Because yes, you are kind of making waves for the people that follow this stuff. They're kind of following you wherever you go, but you don't see the really big mainstream media covering it yet, other than the Joe Rogans and so forth from podcasts.
No, actually, well, I have a lot of interviews with television and radio and many podcasts. Just today, I had 4 of them. And the point is that my essays on medium.com regularly get 50 to 150,000 views, which is like a major newspaper, even though I'm not affiliated with any newspaper. So I'm really grateful. Last month I had a few million readers of my essays on medium.com. That shows a huge interest from the public. And I don't need those outlets because they're usually, trying to get clickbait, and they're not necessarily attending to the details. And I can communicate with the public with the full freedom of giving all the information that I'm aware of and explaining what we know, what we don't know, what the anomalies are. Speaking to a reporter is like hoping you have to hope that the reporter is actually loyal to all the details that you provide, and very often they omit most of the information, just look for the most and sometimes even distort the message in the title of the report. Or so many times people complain, what did I say to the reporter? Complain about how exaggerated it was, but I didn't really say that. That's the reporter distorting my message. And that's why when I write my own essays, I can convey what I really am saying, and I don't need to rely on this legacy media to do that. And that's a great benefit. And and it's quite surprising that there were a few million readers just over 1 month. Because these are not tweets, they are not one-sentence statements. Each of these essays takes 5 minutes to read, and it takes me a few hours to write, and so there is a lot of content in those essays, and people appreciate that, and a lot of young people are attracted to science because of that. And there is one girl that she's the daughter of a pilot, the former pilot of the US Air Force. And he sent me an email saying, because of you, my daughter wants to become a scientist. So I mentioned her in one of my essays, and then she was thrilled. And then I mentioned her also on the Joe Rogan podcast. And then the principal of her school distributed the message to all the kids in the school, and now she's a celebrity over there.
And you've made a dumb wrestler like me read your Medium articles and actually have interest in it. So you have converted a lot of people to be interested in this stuff. So I commend you for that.
Thank
Somebody's asking you here if you think humanity is ready for disclosure if this was technological, and could this be why NASA is not revealing the pictures from October 2nd and 3rd?
Yeah, I don't think humanity is ready. I don't expect much political action on this until the first encounter. Once we very reliably confirm that we encountered alien technology, then of course everything will change, and perhaps we will allocate $1 trillion a year to space exploration, to an alert system that will tell us when something that poses a threat is approaching Earth from the outskirts of the solar system, and maybe a set of interceptors that could give us close-up images. So I think there would be a lot of attention as soon as we confirm it, but it's a chicken and egg problem. Unless we are curious, unless we invest a lot of resources in getting data from the future interstellar objects, and there would be a new one every few months from the Rubin Observatory in Chile. So we're entering an amazingly exciting new era now of finding more interstellar objects, and we can check if each and every one of them is a rock or maybe something else. And we were just not aware of how much traffic there is in our neighborhood, and now we will be more aware. And my hope is that we will find something that will inspire us to do better in the future as a technological civilization, and work together, because we are all in the same boat, and it's a waste of resources for us to fight each other on this earth rather than cooperate together as the human species.
Jacqueline wants to know if you've explored cymatics or waveform interference to detect message bearing resonance.
No, I didn't.
Very interesting. As far as the International Asteroid Warning Network now taking an interest in this, and I guess there's an official warning coming out later this month until January. Could you explain to us the significance of this?
Yeah, they decided to have a campaign. This organization is affiliated with the United Nations, and their campaign was announced a couple of weeks after I submitted the white paper to the United Nations. Maybe it's related, maybe not, but at any event, I very much salute their decision to use as many observatories as possible on Earth to observe 3I Atlas between November 27th and January 27th. And that will obviously give us a lot of data that would be very helpful in figuring out the nature of the object. And so I'm very much looking forward to that data. My guess is that by Christmas, we will have enough information to say more about the nature of this object. And I would obviously update my ranking on the Loeb scale accordingly.
So by Christmas, in theory, we might be able to not have to worry about the negative part about it again, ideally.
Well, let's hope. You never know if there is a serial killer on your blind date. You have to watch it before you decide.
Someone is asking here, you mentioned co-authoring a paper on negative mass propulsion. When will it be released? And are you linking this concept to UAPs or interstellar technology?
Well, it could be related to UAPs or interstellar objects. We are hoping to finish it within the next couple of months. And of course, I will report about it in an essay on medium.com. So just stay tuned.
Someone wants to know if 3I Atlas could have come from a wormhole. And also, before it entered our solar system, could it have been going faster? Because I know there's a lot of objects in our solar system it could potentially hit.
Right. It could have moved faster. We don't know where it came from. We don't know also how far away it started its journey. And one thing to keep in mind is if it came from outside the solar system, it entered the outskirts of the solar system at the edge of the Oort cloud at a distance of 100,000 times the Earth-Sun separation about 8,000 years ago. So, it was when human history started to be recorded, and then it made its way towards us. If there is some camp of, technological gadgets within the solar system, we wouldn't be able to observe them. An object as big as 3I Atlas, which is, let's say, more than 5 kilometers in diameter, can only be seen out to about 10 times the Earth-Sun separation. So if there is something like it beyond 10 times the Earth-Sun separation, the solar system continues up to 100,000 times the Earth-Sun separation, anywhere in between 10 and 100,000 times the Earth-Sun separation, you could have these things parked and we wouldn't even know about it.
What are your thoughts on the increase of unidentified submerged objects recently, simultaneously, while the ramping up of the 3I Atlas at the same time? Do you think there's a connection?
There could be. It's very interesting, and Representative Tim Borchett talked about it recently. I haven't seen the data that he's referring to. That there is a claim that there are objects moving very fast underwater that defy our technological capabilities. And of course, it doesn't really matter if it's in the atmosphere or inside the oceans, as long as we are definitely seeing something performing differently than our best technologies. We should be, examining, studying that very seriously. It's unlikely to be related to adversarial nations, because I think all nations on Earth have roughly the same technologies, nothing that is sticking out dramatically. And so, any such data should be attended to. And once again, if it has to do with anything that came from outside the solar system, it's not under the jurisdiction of government. They're supposed to worry about national security. Anything that comes from outside the solar system is international security. It's not national security.
Ross Coulthart yesterday apparently said that the sun could work as a wormhole for alien visitors. Could this somehow be related to the 3I Atlas that's been behind the sun lately?
Yeah, but as long as it doesn't come out, but it looks like it continues close to its original path. And there is no evidence that the sun is related to a wormhole. There is no reason to suspect. We don't even know if a wormhole exists, because it requires, we know that according to Einstein's theory of gravity, you can't make wormholes. The only caveat is if you have access to a negative mass or negative mass density, that's the only way to make a stable wormhole, and that requires quantum mechanics. So we don't have a theory of quantum gravity. And therefore, us, Coulthart is just speculating. There is no way to say anything about wormholes, and anything that, if we don't know if they exist, obviously we don't know if there is anything related to the sun.
Last fan question, and there's been hundreds, so thank you all the fans. Is 3I moving faster than the escape velocity of the sun? If true, is gravitational slingshot possible at such speed?
Yeah, so 3I Atlas, even at perihelion, is moving at 68 kilometers per second. At the surface of the sun, the escape speed is 500 kilometers per second, so it's much higher. This object is passing between the orbit of the Earth and Mars around the sun at 1.36 times the Earth-Sun separation. So it's not coming very close to the sun. And it's moving fast enough at 68 kilometers per second that it's only deflected a little bit by the gravity of the sun. So the trajectory is not modified much. And that's very different from Oumuamua, that was moving much slower at less than half the speed. And therefore, its trajectory was bent significantly, like a slingshot, a gravitational slingshot situation. However, for 3I Atlas, it's a fast mover and not really deflected much by the sun. It's moving in a slightly different direction after passing close to the sun. But the real question is whether the non-gravitational acceleration would intensify, whether it would follow a new path, whether it would release any mini probes, whether, if it is a natural comet, it has a massive cloud of gas around it right now. and let's just watch it in the coming weeks, and we'll figure it out. So it's not a mystery. It's not a matter of, we shouldn't decide ahead of time. We should just look at the data and then see what it is.
And not do what CBC in Canada is doing, already putting news out there. Hey, this is just a comet, no story here.
Yeah, but the Vatican insisted for centuries that the Earth is at the center of the universe, and obviously the Earth was moving at the time around the sun. So the fact that they said that didn't change anything. It only affected the people who believe what they say, and so we shouldn't believe the CBC. That's the only thing to keep in mind. They can say whatever they want, but it won't change the nature of 3i Atlas, for the same reason that the Earth moved around the sun 4.5 billion times before the Vatican even existed. So then the Vatican comes along and says the sun is moving around the Earth, but the Earth already moved 4.5 billion times, and the Vatican could say whatever they want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I find you a great hero for the world right now, and I'll let you close this down with whatever you want to tell the fans.
Well, my message is stay curious and maintain your childhood curiosity. And it really doesn't pay to pretend to be the adult in the room that knows the answers, that always makes a statement that is boring. Because science could be exciting, and we might find something new, and that's the whole point about doing scientific research: not to surrender to past knowledge, but to learn something new. And it's not done by influencers, it's not done by commentators, it's not done by politicians. Science is done by paying attention to data, and that's how we should be guided. And the amazing thing is that nature every now and then surprises us, so we learn something new, and that's why it's so much fun, and that's why I don't care what people say. I just want to see the data.